Likutei Sichos, Chelek Tezayin, Volume 16. This is the last Sicha in Likutei Sichos Chelek Tezayin, being learned for the week of Chol Hamoed Pesach. Although the regular project Likutei Sichos is already on to Chelek Yud Zayin, Volume 17. For this week, we're learning the Sicha for Parshas Hachodesh in Chelek Tezayin, page 481. We've discussed many times as nit kukendig auf dem was in Mei HaChodesh und Mei HaShavua werden gerechnet loi zwei besondere Cheshbonos. Despite the fact that days of the month and days of the week are generally determined based on separate calculations, abhängig einer von zweiten, they are independent of each other. And because they're independent of each other, wenn a Yom Tov was wird bestimmt like Necheshbon from the Yemei HaChodesh, a Yom Tov, a holiday, which generally is observed based on a specific day of the month. Be Pesach, for example, Pesach was his Alamol B'Tesvav B'Nissen, which is always observed on the 15th of Nisan. Falt ois b'yom Shabbos, if it happens to be on Shabbos, darf ois kommen lechora, seemingly as the zwei kedushas in selben Tag, these two sanctities that occur on the same day that happen to coincide. The Kedushas Shabbos, the holiness of Shabbos, Mitzad Seder von Yemei HaShavua, which is determined based on its day of the week. And Kedushas Yom Tov and the sanctity of Yom Tov, Mitzad Yemei HaChodesh, which is a result of its day of the month. There are two separate, independent concepts. And they have no connection to each other. Since everything in Welt, whether it's in the world, and especially in Torah, it occurs with the divine providence and with extreme precision. Is verstandig, as das Gufe was der Tag in Chodesh, in dem Tag von Woch, when a certain day of the month occurs on a certain specific day of the week, is a beweis, as es is da. This is a proof. This is an indication that there is or not only that there is, but it causes a relationship between these two concepts. You do the Raya of them from Shas, and there's proof from the Gemara in Tractate Zvachim. The Gemara sagt in Zvachim, Rosh Chodesh l'musaf in the day anid l'musvei Shabbos l'yahane. The day Rosh Chodesh accomplishes something great through its own carbon musaf. Should it not accomplish something for Shabbos as well? And the explanation in that is, as the karbanos musaf for Shabbos, generally, we bring a regular carbon musaf on Shabbos. It has its own unique type of sanctity, and musaf also has its own unique type of sanctity, a greater sanctity on the of the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh over the carbon musaf of Shabbos. However, when you bring a carbon musaf on Shabbos, it's also Rosh Chodesh. Haben in sich euch die kedusha von musaf Rosh Chodesh. They contain in them also the sanctity of Musaf Rosh Chodesh, was Musaf Rosh Chodesh Mekudashim Mishal Shabbos, because the Musaf offering of Rosh Chodesh is considered more holy and more sanctified than the Musaf of Shabbos. Kumtois, this indicates to us as the Shaykhs and Uftu Ahane from Rosh Chodesh, what Rosh Chodesh accomplishes is not nor in them tog where is a prat in the Mei HaChodesh. It's not only the fact that it's the first of the month being determined based on its date of the month, Shabbos, and also it also accomplishes something and transforms Shabbos itself, as is very that Rosh Chodesh Dikar Shabbos. This Shabbos is considered a more sanctified, a holier Shabbos, given its association with Rosh Chodesh. So Rosh Chodesh, which is determined based on the day of the month, actually has an effect on the Shabbos, which is determined based on the day of the week. Coming back around full circle to our discussion, Parshas Hachodesh, as trotz dem was sie is allemal gebunden. Shabbos Parshas Hachodesh is always associated nicht mit a bestimmten Tag in Chodesh, not with a specific day of the month, nor mit Yom HaShabbos. It's always observed on Shabbos. Obviously, is aber da limud miyuchad. There is a special teaching in the minyan von Hachodesh within Hachodesh, from the bestimmten Tag in Hachodesh, when it occurs on a specific day of the month. When Shabbos Parshas Hachodesh faltois. So if Shabbos Parshas Hachodesh falls out on a certain, if it's observed and occurs on a certain day of the month, we will discover an association and a relationship between the day of the month and the day of the week, the Shabbos. Well, the Dugma, for example, when das Falt is, wie Hayorike Kvies, B'chafib Adar, the year that this Sikha was published in 1979, Shabbos, Parshas Hachodesh, was on the 25th of Adar, Vasladas Rabbi Yeshua, according to Rabbi Yeshua, Ben Nisan Nivra Olam, who says that the world was created in the month of Nisan, is as their Yoim Harishon from Sheshus and Mebreshus, the 25th of Adar is then the first day of creation. So the dispute in the Talmud, as we'll discuss later in detail, between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer says the world was created in the month of Tishrei. Rabbi Yeshua says that the world was created in the month of Nisan. And really what they mean is that the world was created on the 25th of the month prior. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, the world was created on the 25th of Elul, and according to Rabbi Yeshua, the world was created on the 25th of Adar. State in Medrash. Now the Medrash says, with regards to the chronological order of the Torah, really, the Torah should have started with this verse, this commandment that we read in Parshas Boy, which we read for Parshas Hachodesh, that the Jewish people are commanded to establish a calendar. Based on this, we can say, does there say that in Torah is Torah, since the order in which Torah is laid out is precise and is also considered part of Torah. The order, the way we read it, the chronological or the non-chronological order of Torah is actually part of Torah as well. So when the Medrash says that the Torah should have started with Hachodesh Zalochem, that indicates as Hachodesh Zalochem, Yomer is a Yesod Dugma from Kol HaTorah. That this verse really is a foundation and sets an example for all of Torah. The Haschol and Yesod from all mitzvahs. It's the beginning and the foundation for all mitzvahs is Hachodesh, this mitzvah of establishing a calendar, Hachodesh Zalochem. The beer in them is moving from Maimer Chazal of Hachodesh Zalochem Reish Chodashim. So there's another teaching of our sages on this same verse of Hachodesh Zalochem. Was der Mid gemeint Chodesh Nisan. Obviously, the month that this verse is referring to is the month of Nisan. Was is der Chodesh HaGeula von Galus Mitzrayim, the month that we were liberated from the exile in Egypt. What do the sages say? When Hashem selected Yaakov and his sons, Kova boy, he established for them Rosh Chodesh Shel Geula. He established for them a month or a Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month, that will serve as a month of redemption. This haste as the avodah from Yaakov Avon, the service that Yaakov and his sons accomplish in this world, which is kiyum mitzvahs, performing Hashem's commandments, is to oifton dem inyan hageula in olam. The purpose of all the mitzvahs that we do is to bring the world into a liberated state. That is Bachar HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Olamei. That's what this verse means, that Hashem chose His world. He chose for the world to be liberated, and that's accomplished through Yaakov and his sons, the Jewish people, performing mitzvahs. Welt mitzad atzmoi is an amatze from Golus. World on its own, the way it just is without any mitzvahs being accomplished, is always going to be considered an exile state. While olam, the word olam, which is world, is from Lashon helem, is etymologically similar to the word helem, which means concealment. Elikus is behelem behester in Welt. The godliness is concealed within the world. Und afilu azayindik in Welt kommt men zu der Hakara as yesh balabais lebirazu. Although once you're in this world, you could recognize that there is a master to this universe, that Hashem exists. It's just not after feel if Welt is machriach as hota balabais. That is limited to what the world allows you to recognize. So you might be able to recognize that Hashem exists in this world, but only based on our perspective within this universe. In other words, the only godliness that we are privy to in this world is the godliness that is enclosed or that exists within this world. It's a limited, it's a limited light. We're not going to see the full extent of godliness if we are within this world. So the world conceals godliness, and all you can see is the little bit that Hashem allows through. But when the Jewish people perform Torah and observe Torah and keep and perform mitzvahs, that accomplishes redemption. We break free from the boundaries and the concealment, and we draw down into this world the godly light that is generally beyond the world. And vibal does the avodah von Aiden is poelim in a gula, because this geula, this redemption, is affected through the mitzvahs that we do in this world, that Jewish people perform in this world. Is movon that teaches us as euch the avodah gufa darf getan werden from the gula. So this service that we do, all of our mitzvahs that we fulfill in this world, need to also be accomplished in a manner of geula, of freedom and redemption. A Jew must perform Torah mitzvahs as a liberated individual. You have to feel liberated, as er is frei, that you're free, nicht untergeworfen dem Helm von Welt, not under the sovereignty of the concealment of the world. Und kein Zach kann ihm nicht sterben, der Avodah von Torah mitzvahs, and nothing can disrupt your drive to perform Torah mitzvahs. In a tiefer Reifen meint this, a little deeper, to understand this a little bit deeper, as Aid geht reis from the Hagbolas from seine eigene Teva. A Jew must free himself from the limitations of his own personality and of his own nature. Sein Tonnen Avodas Hashem is nicht begrenzt nur zu den Yonim in welcher hat der Geschmack mitzat tivoi. When you perform Torah mitzvahs, it should not be limited to things that you enjoy, that you personally have an enjoyment for. Und in sei gufe is ein chayes nur wie volles man sich mit sein teva. And even in those things that you do enjoy, you're not going to do it all the time, only when you have the right amount of energy to do it. Now, tut alle mitzvahs mit a chayes built in mugbelas von neshama. What does it mean to be liberated and free and redeemed when you perform Torah mitzvahs, all of Torah mitzvahs, without any limitations, and you allow your soul to take over rather than your body? And there, ofen from kiyum Torah mitzvahs, this manner, this style of observing Torah mitzvahs, is mirumaz in the nomen from the parsha. That's alluded to in the name of this parsha, Hachodesh milashon chidush. The word Hachodesh meaning this month, but it also implies that there is something new and innovative occurring. Something new, something different. Kiyum Torah mitzvahs, when we observe Torah mitzvahs, darf nicht getan werden, as if we tut an alte, eingewohnte Sach. You have to do it not as if it is something old and habitual, nor wie a neue Sach. It has to be something new. Bechol yom miyu beinecha chadashim. Torah needs to be treated as something new every single day. Was man tut das mit Chayes und Übergebenkeit, you perform Torah mitzvahs with the energy and devotion, was das drückt sich aus in mekayim dein Torah mitzvahs mit dem größten Hidur, was is meglach. And that is expressed in how we perform Torah mitzvahs, doing it in the most precise manner. That would be an expression of doing Torah mitzvahs new and in an innovative fashion every single day. Now, how can we expect someone to perform Torah mitzvahs as if it's new? B'shas sein Guf is täglich eingewohnt in limud Torah v'kiyum mitzvahs. When your body is already used to it, it's already used to following this particular pattern, doing Torah mitzvahs a very specific and precise way every day. How can you expect a Yid? How can you expect a Jewish person to suddenly start doing things differently, as if it is something completely new when you're already used to it? It's already part of your habitual activities. He's called, man findet sich in the Hagbolas von dem eigenen Metzias. So as long as a person is indeed limited by his own personality, kann sich taken befreien von dem Hergish, as Torah mitzvahs seinen Weh, man eingewohnter Indien. That, under those circumstances, it's true, you cannot expect him to free himself from viewing Torah mitzvahs as something that he's already used to, something that he does out of habit. However, when you leap out of your own personality, and you accomplish within yourself the exodus from Egypt in a most internal manner, when you leave the boundaries and limitations of your own personality and your own nature, then that leads to your own personal observance of Torah mitzvahs to be new and innovative every single time. Now, you might think, as das ist alles gerät geworden, nor beneged the suga voide fulum the Torah v'kiyama mitzvah v'shayach to their neshama. That this breaking free and leaping out of your nature only applies to Torah mitzvahs as they relate to the soul. Varum chach Torah mitzvahs seien angetan in Varum gashmi v'inyan elam hazeh. Although Torah mitzvahs are indeed enclosed and are expressed through material and worldly matters, haben sie aber mehr shaychus to the neshama b'tzim guf. They're still somewhat more related to the soul than they are to the body. That's what you would think. Und in dem ist verstandig, wie er kann Pearl sein bei sich, zu herausgehen von Mitzrayim. So as long as Torah mitzvahs are associated with the soul, you can say, I understand how I can break free from my own personal Egypt. Von den Mitzarim ugvulim von Teva Haguf, from the boundaries and limitations that the body's nature places upon us, and then we can perform Torah mitzvahs in a spiritual level, and treat it as if it's something new and innovative, because it's all the soul, the neshama. However, when we're talking about all of our deeds, all of our daily activities being done for the sake of heaven, and acknowledging and discovering Hashem within all of our ways, meaning our own day-to-day lives. When a Jew is involved in worldly matters. So true, everything that a person does, everything that a Jew does is for the sake of heaven. It is still quite evident that it is his own activities and his own ways. It's activities associated with the body. Is wie kommen bei der Avoide man, as man soll sich äußern von Teva Haguf, how can we expect a person to leave his nature when it's a service associated with his actual body and the physical world around him? At that very moment, all he thinks about and all he knows about is his bodily and his worldly matters. So how can we expect someone to break free? If we're talking about only the neshama, the soul, then sure, you can break free and you can be innovative in your observance of Torah mitzvahs. But when you're limited, when it's all about your body and the world around you, which is extremely limiting and prevents a person from generally growing, how can we expect them to treat Torah mitzvahs as something new and innovative every single day? So going back to the beginning of the Sikha, this is the lesson from Parshas Hachodesh occurring on the 25th of Adar. The Yom Rishon from Ma'aseh Bereishis, which is, according to Rabbi Yeshua, we said the first day of creation. As the Inyane Habriya, even matters associated with creation, which is implied by it being the 25th of Adar, Chafei Adar, can sein und darf sein die Avoid in Anofen von Hachodesh Lamayla Medude Vagbala. Even in these matters associated with the physical world, with creation, with our own limitations, can also be treated and can also accomplish innovation and reach beyond any of these limitations. These are before Meglach. Still, it's a nice concept, but how is it actually possible as the that these two contradictory concepts should exist at the same time? While a person is completely involved in bodily matters, at the same time to be removed from the body's nature, to go beyond that. He says, therefore, how is that accomplished? It's through Vasaid hat Shaykhs to der Brie Vizis Baschafen geworden. Nicht bechafe be'el Gedas Rabbi Eliezer, petition Ivraelam, nor bechafe ba'ader Kedas Rabbi Yeshua. How can a Jew accomplish this? Because a Jew is associated with creation that occurred on the 25th of Adar, which, as we said earlier, was the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, as opposed to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that the world was created in Tishrei, meaning that the first day of creation was the 25th of Elul. We'll explain what this means and how this can actually be the impetus for a Jew to break free. This is Yodua. It is well known as the Tzvei Deis, these two opinions, Das Rabbi Yeshua and Das Rabbi Eliezer, the opinions of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, as we discussed, Zayin Beide Emes, both are true. In general, two opinions in the Talmud, both are true. Both have truth to it. The Nissen is as given in von alle b'machshava livre. Creation that occurred in the month of Nisan, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, that's when Hashem had the thought to create the world. When the Bria bepoil, but the actual creation occurred is given b'Tishrei. That occurred in the month of Tishrei. And thus is masim midem, was is mevur in Sifrei Kabbalah. This correlates with the teachings of Kabbalah. As ben Nisan nivra olam, that when the Talmud states that the world was created in Nisan, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, main dominion abriya b'shayches to pnimiyas olam. That refers to the creation of the world in the most internal and esoteric manner. And when the Talmud states that the world was created in Tishrei, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, that refers to chitzonis olam, as the external element of the world. What does internal and external mean? Chitzonis olam, external elements of the world, is wie der Welt setzt sich an in chitzonis leine basar. That's the world the way we see it with our own physical eyes. Als adavar b'fnei atzmoi, nifrit von elikos. It seems like it's an independent entity separated from godliness. And dihis avos is when the Dibura is barach. This creation occurred through Hashem speaking. The Dibura shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu chashiv ma'aseh. God's speech is like action. Was Dibur wird nimshach be'oifen, as es setzt sich aus. Legabe nivroim, wie wird gewähnt, kwa yochel ein Ingen nifrit von ihm yisbarach. Once the speech occurs, and it caused there to be a world, it caused there to be a created universe, that universe, which is an extension of God's speech, now seems to be something separated from God. The internal element of the universe is the way the world is viewed in the most internal manner. Where the world and the entire universe and everything created within it is one, is unified with Hashem. That is the creation that occurs in God's thought. Similarly to Lamata, Lahavdil in a man's thought, when a person thinks something, your thoughts always remain inside your head. Once they leave your mind and you express it either in speech or in deed, it's no longer thought. But thought will always remain inside your head. And the same as with creation. When Hashem had a thought to create the world, that thought, and therefore that element of creation, always remains unified and one with Hashem. And das ist the shaychus von die zwei Inyone Hisabos to the Hachodesh Tishrei v'Nisan. This is also how it relates, how these two components of creation relate to the months of Tishrei and Nisan. The avodah von Tishrei is b'derech milmata l'mayla avodas hatshuva. Tishrei, the month of Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is generally considered to be a month where we are inspired below, and then we ascend, we go up. Avodas hatshuva, which is similar to someone who repents, who does tshuva, starts at the bottom and he climbs up. Therefore, because you need to return to God, that itself is an indication that prior to your return, prior to your tshuva, you were distant. In Aveda, from the perspective of this level, it seems quite clear and quite obvious that, at least from this perspective, that the world and the universe does have its own existence. And therefore we need to have proof that there is a master to this universe, that Hashem exists. But without that proof, it seems that the world is an independent entity from Hashem. That's Tishrei. The avodah for Nisan, however, when it comes to the month of Nisan, which is avodas tzaddikim, that represents the service of tzaddikim, of the most righteous people. That's milmayla lamata. That inspiration starts from above and comes down. It is milchatchila karev u'miyuchad mit. The tzaddik is always close and united, fused with godliness. B'meila is by the tzaddik, the opposite is true. Elikus is margish b'pshitus. He feels godliness in its most obvious and evident manner. He doesn't need any proof for that. That's obvious. Und die Metzies an Evraim hat bei meiner Ort in der Hergisch nor der Farbe, was hat der Ruf Eichache von Teure. The existence of the universe and the world and all the creations around are only considered because Torah says so, because there's proof in Torah that they exist. What's the proof in Torah that the world exists? The pasuk, the verse, Bereshis bar Elikim, in the beginning Hashem created. Ubemela is Welt beim Hischachos, und sie ist Tevis Mokim, nor avifol Torah git farir anort. So, from that perspective, from the perspective of a tzaddik, the world's existence is only true because Torah says so, and therefore it's limited to the way Torah describes the world's existence. Bereshis bar Elikim. Und wie bald as Neshama seine Shaykh zu Pnimis Ha'olam as beginnes Machshava, because the soul of a Jew is sourced and rooted in the internal aspects of the world, in God's thought, is verstandig, so therefore it is obvious, as jeder Id hat koyach zu peil sein, as der Herr nelekus b'pshitus and metzius v'ischatus. Every Jew can actually reach that level, the level of godliness being most apparent, most obvious, and what requires proof is that the world exists. As the Echache of the Veranigkeit Welt is by him nor Valteres of Bereshis bar Elikim. And the only proof that the world exists for every Jew can actually be at this level to require proof that the world exists from the Torah, when the Torah tells us that Hashem created the world. And therefore every Jew can live his life with where every step of his day, every part of his life is permeated with Torah. Sein Hisaskus in Yonah Yagufa Elam is Val Torah Zaktim as das Zaktimon das Tutan. Any involvement that a Jew now has within the universe, within the physical existence of the world, is only because the Torah requires him to do so. And everything that we do has to be done for the sake of heaven, and all of our ways need to be infused with knowledge of Hashem. But that we do that because Hashem tells us to. Ideally, the neshama, the soul, would really want to be completely holy and spiritual. Therefore, every Jew, even someone who is not completely a tzaddik, and even a Jew who does have a proclivity to be more worldly and more materialistic, but because every Jew has a soul, and every soul is rooted in the internal level of the universe, which is Hashem's thought. Therefore, every Jew can always observe Torah and mitzvahs in the most innovative fashion, going beyond the limitations that your own personal nature would generally limit you to. As ad dem inyan, this concept, the chibur from Hachodesh mit Chafei Adar, when we connect Hachodesh, which is the Shabbos Hachodesh, and the 25th of Adar, is Rashi Miram is in the Maimer, where Rashi quotes this teaching of the sages of that the Torah really should have started with the verse teaching the commandment of setting a calendar. Rashi quotes this teaching right at the beginning of the Torah, on the first verse in the Torah, Bereshis bar Elikim. Rashi said that the Torah should have really started with the commandment of Hachodesh Elochem. Lechura is not galactic. Seemingly, there's something over here that doesn't really flow. First of all, Kiyadua is nicht der Derech von Rashi zu sagen, früher die Schwierigkeiten pasuk und danach verändern sich. Generally, when Rashi has a question, he doesn't actually say a question and then answer it. No, he's very precise and very frugal in his words, and he'll usually just start with the answer, and he'll leave it up to us to try to understand what the question was. And once he provides his explanation, then the question no longer exists. Over here, Rashi actually asks a question. For was stellt the freer the kasha? Well, Rashi starts with a question. He says, that the Torah should have started with Hachodesh Elochem. And it doesn't as he would normally do with his explanation. At Pasach Bebereshis, that the reason why the Torah started with Bereshis is because Mishum Koyach Ma'asav Higid La'amoy, to inform his nation of the strength of his action, so that they should receive the inheritance of the nations. As Rashi continues to explain, that the reason he started with Bereshis was to inform the world and the Jewish people that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, belongs to the Jewish people. But why does Rashi start with a question? Why doesn't he just go straight into the answer, as he usually does? Based, Another concern we have over here. I feel even if we were to say, as benitten die dan, in our case, wollt man nicht verstanden die Schwierigkeit in dem, was Pasach bebreische Zeit misfrier Masber, als die Teure, was gehört zu jüdischen Volk, hat sich gedacht, anheben mit Hachodesh Zalachem. Shehi mitzvah shenesh David Yisrael. Even if the question would not have been so obvious. And therefore, Rashi may have had to first explain to us that the Torah should have started with Hachodesh Zalachem. Is a before Nidglatik in Peter Rashi. There's still something over here that doesn't work so perfectly, at least from the outset, in Rashi's words. First of all, Aleph, was is done as mitzvah rishonish and estavu by Yisrael is Hachodesh Zalachem. Why in the first pasuk in Bereshis is it important and is it necessary to say that the first mitzvah the Jewish people had received was Hachodesh Zalachem? Rashi could have seemingly very briefly and more concisely said that Rashi gedarf mekatzer sein and sagen lohoyt zurech lahaskel as Torah ela mitzvah rishayna shenisdavu by Yisrael. It could have very easily said the Torah should have started with the first mitzvah that the Jewish people received. Why did he have to say what that first mitzvah was? Why is that relevant? Beis. Secondly, assuming that Rashi had to explain the question and we wouldn't have understood it on our own. Ibal, as Rashi's kashe, since Rashi's question over here is vimefarshim zagen, as the commentators on Rashi say, as the all parshas bis hachodesh haben nit gedarf stehen in Torah shebichsav, that the entire Torah, according to the commentators, this is what Rashi means, that the entire Torah leading up to Hachodesh Zalachem should not have been mentioned at all. Why does Rashi use the wording from the Medrash that the Torah should not have started with Bereshis? Was is mashmas blois the hascholot gedarf sein nit mit them, implying that only the beginning should have been different, but that everything that is listed or described in the Torah between Bereshis and Hachodesh could have still been described and included in the Torah, but later. It's not at the beginning. As well, given mer matim zu sagen, more appropriate would have been to say Kaloshna Medrash, as the Medrash actually does say, the Torah should have not been written from where it does start, but rather start with Hachodesh Zalachem and not write anything else. Everything leading up to that point, seemingly is not relevant. But Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi said that the Torah should have only started with Hachodesh Zalachem. The first mitzvah explains the question, and why does Rashi go to a great length to describe this? Is there beer in them? The explanation in Yena Shal Torah versus the Pirush Rashi, in the wine of Torah, in the sweetest and most intoxicating parts of Torah. When Rashi said that the Torah should have only started with Hachodesh Zalachem, is nit narakalka daitach. It's not just a original assumption. No, it is bleibt euch lefi hamaskana. When we come to the conclusion, that statement still holds true, that the Torah really should have started with Hachodesh Zalachem. Because this is the first mitzvah that the Jewish people were commanded. As we said earlier, this really is the foundation for the entire Torah. Hachodesh Zalachem is the foundation for the entire Torah. And das meint Rashi to Meramazayim mit seinem Pirush on Bereshis, and this is what Rashi is alluding to in his commentary on the first verse in the Torah on Bereshis. The Torah should have only begun with this verse of Hachodesh Zalachem. Since the statement in Torah that Hashem created the world, Bereshis bara, is also part of Torah, therefore we must say, as Hachodesh Zalachem Geimer is Haschala v'Yisoid Euch von Bereshis bara, that Hachodesh Zalachem, the first mitzvah that the Jewish people received, with all of its commentary, as we explained earlier in the Sikha, is also a foundation and a beginning for Bereshis bara, which is the Torah's description of creation. Das meint, as the avodah von Eden in an oifun von Hachodesh Geimer, when a Yid does Torah mitzvahs and he performs his spiritual service as a Hachodesh, like we said earlier, innovative and exciting and invigorating and always treating it as something new, that also has to hold true when it comes to worldly matters. öften in der Geula in Welt Gufa, as we said earlier, to accomplish freedom and redemption within the world. Und wie Rashi is Masbir and Hemshech Pirusha, as Rashi says in the continuation of his remarks, Pasach Bereishis, the reason why the Torah does start with Bereishis, Mishum Koyach Maisev Higid La'amai, to proclaim the strength of his actions, Los Islam Nachlas Goy, to give them the inheritance of the nation. The Avodah von Eden besteht in them as Eich Nachlas Goyim. A Jew's real accomplishment is that when even Nachlas Goyim over here refers to Welt, the world, which is the inheritance of the nation, soll werden ausgeleist, it should also be freed, und again in Rishus von Eden, and should be transferred to the domain of the Jewish people. And they will transform that to a divine entity, un aveg to the EU, and a path to know God, to know Hashem. One more connection between Parshas Hachodesh and the 25th of Adar. When the Torah says that this month should be the beginning of all months for you, that's referring to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan, which was Yom Vav L'Maaseh Bereishis, according to the Ladas Rabbi Yeshua. According to Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, this was the 6th day of creation, that talked from Brias Adam, the day that man was created. And this is the connection with the earlier statement from our sages on this same pasuk, which we said that when Hashem chose Yaakov and his sons, He established for them a month of redemption. While in them tag is so on this day man was created. Und damit hat sich aufgetan dem Ehen von Avodas Adam von Yibachar Yaakov Avanav. As soon as man was created on the 1st of Nisan, that is when their mandate to do Torah mitzvahs and to transform the world started. In our life from Chidush and Geula Kanal, and it must be done in an innovative fashion, leading to redemption, to Geula. That's if it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when man was created. But Chafei Adar, the beginning of creation, before man was created and before his service began, is the at that point, the creation, because man didn't exist yet, it was all because of the inspiration from above and because of Hashem's desire for kindness. So this is the lesson when Parshas Hachodesh occurs on the 25th of Adar, as even the beginning of creation. And the only reason it exists is because of Hashem's desire for kindness, because there was no Torah mitzvahs happening yet. Is still on a deeper level truly connected to Hachodesh, with Avodas Adam, with man's mitzvahs, with man's observance of Torah mitzvahs. There's a famous statement from our sages with regard to creation in general. When God decided to create the world, He consulted with the souls of tzaddikim, even though the humans didn't exist yet at the time. As the ganze in Abri is given durch them. However, all of creation happened because Allah lefanav yisbarach, God imagined He imagined the pleasure that He will derive, so to speak, from the mitzvahs observed by tzaddikim, by righteous people in this world. They're beer in them. Just to explain what this means. Das was the Bria mitzat chafetz chesed, who is val koydem abriya. When we say that the world was created because of God's desire to express kindness, that's because before the world was created, it says, when the godly light is still completely removed from any concept of creation, on that level, man's work and man's service, anything that man does, has really zero effect. And therefore, creation can only exist as a result of an inspiration from above, from Hashem's own desire. He wanted to do kindness. On the other hand, Is mitzad dem was chafetz chesed who is das gufa bringt as Hachodesh and Ibrahim soll yehaben at tvisas mokim, because of Hashem's desire to do kindness that causes for man's service to positively have an effect. So although man didn't exist yet, but because Hashem created the world out of his desire to be kind, that allows us to make a positive effect on the world. Ubimela is the Sibas Abriya verbunden. Therefore, the reason for creation is connected through Chavetz Chesed, through God's desire for kindness. Because God envisioned and he imagined to himself what the mitzvahs of tzaddikim will look like. If das is eine von den Biurim in den Teure von Magid. Mesicher Magid has a teaching. As the Bri is given b'shvil she'im Yisrael tzaddikim b'cholder, the whole purpose of creation was for the Jewish people to be righteous in every single generation. And we bald as by Kadosh Baruch Hu zayin ha'avar v'ha'asid shavim, because from Hashem's perspective, the past and the future are equal. Therefore, he was already deriving pleasure from the mitzvahs of tzaddikim even before it occurred, because for Hashem, the past, present, and future are all identical, are all equal. But Hashem saw that through the service of tzaddikim, he will have so much pleasure that he constricted himself, he condensed himself, he caused tzimtzum to occur so that he can actually derive that pleasure. Same applies to Jews in general. When the Jewish people were envisioned by Hashem, is there masbir? So then the Mesicher Magid explains as by basar, but with regard to human beings, someone who never had a child, you can't say that in his mind he envisioned what his child will look like when he does have a child. If you have a child, you know what your child looks like currently. But if you don't have any children, there's no way you can truly imagine what your child will look like before the child is born. But with regards to Hashem, even before the Jewish people were created, the image of the Jewish people was already engraved in God's thought, so to speak. Because for Hashem, the past and the future are one. The Lechura, what is the ruftu from them? What does the Magid really accomplish through this teaching? As is Pashut, as the Eliezer is L'mayla min Azman. Obviously, Hashem is greater than time, and the over and also Zayin B'Yim Shavim, and the past and the future are equal. So, what's the Magid really accomplishing? What does he add in his elaboration here? No, der Bier in them is. We're talking over here now about a godly light that is so removed from the world that it really has absolutely no relationship with anything within creation. Really, you think that you can't say that on that level God can imagine and envision what the service of tzaddikim will look like, or their tzuras haben bechlal, or not even their service, but what the tzaddikim themselves look like. How can we say this is the reason that the contraction of the godly light and creation occurred? This is what the Magid's teaching is pointing out. Because the past and the future are equal, is that Indian von Meister Tzaddikim und Tzuras Haben schein nechkak geworden bepeul in dem Beginning von Chavetz Chesed. On the level of God creating the world simply because he desired kindness, he already envisioned what Tzaddikim will look like, what the Jewish people will look like, and what their Torah mitzvahs will look like. It didn't even have to occur for him to have already envisioned it. This level of Chavetz Chesed is completely beyond creation. And that led for there to be the contraction of the godly light, enabling for there to be creation to follow. So everything that occurred up until that point, everything that occurred from that point on was already imagined and envisioned by Hashem on the highest level of Chavetz Chesed. In our daily service of Hashem, We have an important lesson here as well. As even things that we generally rely on an inspiration from above. Which you would think that man can really not accomplish anything and cannot affect it through his Torah mitzvahs, through his service in this world. Even these concepts are still connected to man's service. So even these levels that we feel or we assume are completely beyond our reach, we're informed now that we can also attain that through our Torah mitzvahs in this world. This is also the reason, or at least the deeper reason, why Rashi quotes this statement from our sages that the Torah should not have begun, should have only begun with the Torah Hazalachem. He brings it and he quotes it gleich after pasuk Bereshis Bara, right at the beginning of the Torah, on the verse Bereshis Bara, that Hashem created the world. Was der mitzvah miramas. Rashi alludes now to the fact as B'shas Aid learned that pasuk Bereshis Bara in Torah. When a Jew studies and learns this verse in Torah, is does guf an inyan from avodah. That itself is already part of his service, of the Jew's service. He's learning Torah. So the first thing Rashi wants to tell him, you're already accomplishing as shown in the meaning from Bereshis Bara, right at the beginning, right when you're reading your first verse, right at the beginning of creation, was an inyan from the Sarusa de Laila canal, which creation, especially as it came from the level of Kichafetz Chesed, is entirely an inspiration from above. Is the Hachodesh Elochem. Even there, we already have Hachodesh Elochem with all the details as we explained in the Sicha Vasvaist after Avodah from Yaakov Ivanov, which is the service of Yaakov and his sons, the Jewish people.